differences between traditional, welcoming, and affirming, even if before writing this guide, I didn't use that specific language. I knew generally that there was a spectrum of affirmation where it wasn't simply you're either kicking queer kids out of your institution or you're flying a rainbow flag and having drag brunch for your Old Testament class. I knew there was more of a spectrum than that. And where I learned that initially learned that, was at my first ever Gay Christian Network conference when it was still called GCN back in 2016 in Pittsburgh. There was a presentation done, I think by an Australian queer activist, and he sort of systematized and framed this spectrum of affirmation for the benefit of the people in the room. And so I had an idea, and I also had an idea of what institutions would fit into these categories, or where certain institutions would fit in the spectrum of non-affirmation to affirmation, or as we say, traditional, welcoming, and affirming. When I started making my list of seminaries and divinity schools to look for, I knew that for myself, I didn't want to have any traditional schools on that list. And so there weren't. However, there were schools, like the one I currently attend, who are more in the welcoming side of things. But most of the schools that I looked at were very staunchly affirming. And so I did have a good enough idea, fortunately, growing up as I did in an academic environment. It wasn't unfamiliar to me that there would be variances in certain institutions' policies or attitudes or theologies related to LGBTQ people. It was fun in a certain way going to these institutions and seeing how they lived those out, which ones were on which side of even the affirming spectrum or the welcoming spectrum. And that leads me into the key takeaways that I hope you get from this section of the guide. One of which is you really have to do your own research. This guide can be helpful and hopefully will be helpful in the decision-making process, but really where you will discover if an institution is traditional, welcoming, and affirming is to go to their website, to research the denominational affiliation they have, that denomination's website, to look at news stories related to that denomination, and decide for yourself if this is a school that will keep you safe, first and foremost, but will be beneficial to you professionally, spiritually, personally, all of those things, communally, all of those things which are important to a very successful and healthy seminary experience. So one thing to look out for is, do they have rainbow flags on their website? Isla School of Theology, one of the partners of QCF, has a lot of rainbow colors on their website. You can pretty much assume that they're not doing young earth creationism, they're doing queer affirmation, and they are. You can also think about what is their theological standpoint. Some red flags to look for are biblical inerrancy or marriage between one man and one woman. Some seminaries on their websites do go through and systematize their beliefs and talk about, we believe in God and man, and this is what we believe of the Bible and marriage and sex ethics. And so in some sense, they're doing you a favor. If that school is upfront about their view of non-affirmation, of being traditional in our language, then that gives you the clearest information as to whether or not you want to consider going there. So some schools will be a little bit more obscure about it. You may not get any flags, red flags or rainbow flags, one way or the other, and you really do have to do the work of visiting the school, of talking with students. I visited every institution that I applied for, and that was the single most important decision factor in deciding where I want to go to seminary. Talking with the students, particularly the LGBTQ students, and hearing their perspective and seeing if you will be affirmed, safe, loved, welcomed, whatever it is. So visiting, looking at the websites, doing your own research, but ultimately the key takeaway is that the traditional, welcoming, affirming spectrum is more of a guide. Some of us are actually called to being in the traditional spaces. So it's not to say, don't go, maybe go, definitely go. It's a way of saying, here's what you need to know to expect. Here's what you need to know. What are your boundaries? What are you willing to put up with? What are you willing to not put up with? Where are you wanting to go? What are you wanting to do? All of those questions can be guided by this spectrum of traditional, welcoming, and affirming. And so if you realize that you want to be at a traditional school, then this can help. But if you realize that for whatever reason, be it trauma or be it just your own theological convictions, be it your boundaries, like I said, my boundary was not to have any traditional schools, you'll know, okay, those are the no's, and here are the maybes, and here are the definitelys. However best you need to approach this spectrum, whatever you need to take away from it for the most impactful coming alive experience you can have is how this can be taken away by you.